Welcome again, this is Yasser Wasifi from Learn Dental Series. This episode we will continue our discussion about indirect tooth colored restorations. I would like to declare that I don't receive fees, compensation or royalties from the sales of any of the products shown or discussed in this presentation, and this presentation is not sponsored by any agency, company or organization and only prepared for educational purposes. This presentation is copyright protected and cannot be transmitted by any means unless you get a prior permission of the author. In this episode, you are expected to illustrate the principles of cavity preparation for indirect tooth color restoration. In our previous episode, we started to discuss the topic in terms of part 1, indirect versus direct techniques, including introduction, advantage and disadvantage of the technique and the material, indications and contraindications of indirect tooth color restoration. This episode we will discuss in full details cavity preparation. Cavity preparation will be discussed in terms of introduction, steps of preparation, general features, instrument use, and finally what is newly added to this topic and is an obvious difference between this type of preparation and the other preparations we have studied or discussed before is the concept of cavity lining, which differs than the cavity lining for protection of the body. Let us start firstly to state that cavity preparation for indirect tooth restorative materials varies greatly in its fabrication and in its needs or specifications for cavity preparation from system to system, which are the commercially available system, okay, and due to the variation in physical properties of the available materials for indirect tooth color restoration. That's why before beginning any procedure, you should decide what is the material indicated and what is the selected suitable restorative material you will use for indirect tooth colored restoration, and accordingly you should review the requirements for cavity preparation suitable for this material to get the highest performance of the restorative treatment done. If the clinician is not familiar with the technique, it is helpful to consult the manufacturer literature, and if necessary, also you could ask your lab or production lab to ensure best results. Steps of fabrication, it's very simple like all preparation. A patient should be anesthetized, apply rubber dam or isolate by rubber dam, okay? Any compromised restoration if present, and dental caries should be removed and caries should be excavated, and the walls of your preparation is then restored to a more nearly ideal form with light cured glass ionomer or liner or base or a composite restorative material to block out of undercuts, and this is a major difference that will be discussed in the coming slides. General features of the prepared cavities include that this is an indirect restoration, okay, that have the same idea of inlay or onlay for cast gold restoration, but with about 9 differences that should be considered because of the nature of the material, because the material is not a high strength property material, it is mainly brittle ones, either composite or the high brittleness of ceramics used. That's why there is no enamel bevel or flaring, and the cavo surface margin should be finished to be 90 because those materials, either composite or ceramics, could not be finished like gold, which is ductile, into thin margins. Otherwise, it will fracture under occlusal loading force, leaving open margin. Also, as being brittle, bulk of the material is important. That's why occlusal reduction or capping of weak cusp should be 1.5 to 2.5 millimeter at least, because those are brittle materials, while for gold restoration it is just beveling, as gold in thin margins could withstand the tensile component of occlusal loading force. Cavity tips also should not be less than 2.5 millimeters to add bulk of the material. Axial reduction of 1.5 millimeter is adequate for ceramics and composites. All line and point angles, internal and external, should be rounded to avoid stresses, while that for cast gold restoration it should be sharp to add for axial retention. Okay. Also, isthmus area and any groove extension should be at least 1.5 millimeter wide to improve the bulk of the material and avoid or decrease its liability to fracture. Bulbal floor should be smooth and relatively flat, and following removal of remaining K-resistine or previous restorative material from any internal wall is restored to be ideal in position, okay, with light cured glass ionomer, and this will be the function of or the idea behind lining. Okay, minimal possible extension of the gingival margin to the gingival direction in order to get a gingival floor with sufficient enamel margin that are greatly preferable for bonding and should not go deep subgingival and denying your gingival floor from any enamel. In such a case, the case will not be suitable or indicated for indirect two-scaled restoration. But what is most important is the degree of divergence. The degree of divergence for all indirect restoration that should allow a nearly parallel walls that provides frictional wall retention that compensates for, or in a trial to compensate for, deficient axial retention. But in our case, divergency should be higher than that of cast metal restoration. Cast metal restoration, it is 2 degrees to 5 degrees, and some authors prefers to be up to 6 or up to 8, but as maximum. But here for indirect two-scaled restoration, it should be at least 6 to 8, not at maximum. At least 6 to 8. That means that the divergency of your walls is much more greater than that of the divergency of cast metal restoration. That means that your axial retention is much more violated. Okay? Let me explain why and how to compensate for the deficient, much more deficient axial retention. Number one, you are using a brittle material that could fracture or split into 2 halves if it is subjected to extra frictional forces. That's why it should be placed passively and freely with much more easiness. Okay? But for metallic restoration, it could withstand this force. That's why, okay, we are in need to increase divergence just to get much more relief while inserting and placing your restoration in place. Then, what about the axial retention? The difference in this divergency is compensated by the difference in cementation. For metallic restorations, we couldn't use adhesive resin cement. We use conventional cements. Here we could use the adhesive property of your resin cement to compensate for this divergency. Okay? Those are schematic diagrams showing in figure A the rounded axiopalpal line angle and the widened isthmus portion. For figure B, the depth which is not less than 2 millimeters and the rounded line angles. All of these are considering the brittleness or because of the brittleness of the used materials. Then comes, okay, this view showing the axial reduction with rounded line angles. At least if you are in need to protect a weak cusp or to reduce a weak cusp, you are in need for a space at least 2 millimeter occlusal reduction, and the axial reduction is 1 to 1.5 with complete rounded axial line angles and the axiopalpal line angle. Another schematic diagram shows the reduction of centric cusps of at least 2 millimeters, and this reduction should be uniform in axial and occlusal portion. This is a case which showing defective amalgam restoration with aggressive extensive dental caries, and this is the case after removal of the restoration and showing in the middle picture the remaining undermined tooth structure, and the third one to the right showing it after lining with resin modified GIC that will be discussed in the coming few minutes. What about instruments used? Many manufacturers developed many diamond cutting tools with the required divergency. Just run it parallel to the long axis, and the tilting or the tapering of your instrument will provide you with the required divergency. And already when you purchase any of these, okay, you could note what is written on the back, okay, about the degree of tapering, which should be from 6 to 8 degree of tapering to provide you with the required divergency. Also, you are in need to use diamond points with rounded edges, not with absolutely sharp line angles. Then coming the cavity lining. Cavity lining is always, when you mention this terminology, you always think about bulb protection. In such a case, you are not in need for adequate bulb protection only, okay, but actually it is required, and its main objective is to remove any tooth undercuts that remain after cavity preparation, like this case. In such a case, if we are in need to go for indirect metallic restoration, then you are in need for capping these cusps or to remove these undermined enamel, okay? But here, as being luted with or cemented with adhesive resin cement, you could reinforce it, and to let your cavity be much more conservative, any undercuts that will not severely undermine your enamel could be blocked with any resin compatible material to ensure proper bonding between it and the luting cement and then your fitting surface of your inlay. Okay, that's why the material you used should not block the light transmission, because you will use a light cured or dual cured adhesive resin cement, and should be chemically compatible with the inlay material and the cement system. What is the type of material you could use to block out undercuts? If you discover a minor undercuts after impression and construction of the removable die, it could be lined with wax. In this condition, the wax will act as a separating medium that allow easy removal of the fabricated inlay from the die, and the wax will provide also a room for resin cement. Okay, this is the advantages of using wax in expense of it is a minor, unnoticeable clinically undercut. You already discovered it at the line angles when you constructing your removable die. But remember something. When we will discuss the cementation procedure, please remember what I will tell you now. Wax is a form of oils, or it contains oils, okay, that when you will construct your material, especially composite resin inlays over a wax, then its fitting surface, number one, will not have sufficient free radicals, because already you are consuming it by complete polymerization and with the high degree of conversion as we discussed before. At the same time, your fitting surface is covered by adhesive biofilm, which is the wax that prevents proper adhesion. That's why we are in need to treat this surface not as being composite, then you cement it immediately without treatment. No, it is in need to be treated to remove the traces of adhesive film of oil, and at the same time try to compensate for the missed or deficient free radicals of your fitting surface. Okay, then if you are using optical impressions, okay, like that for spheric systems that will be discussed in our last episode, okay, you are not in need to block out undercut. Why? Because your optical impression using special optical cameras Okay, the light passes in straight lines. Any deviations in a form of undercuts will not be seen and will not be recorded by your optical impression. Okay, and this space will be occupied, space of this undercut in the wall will be occupied by your present cement. That's why you are not in need to use lining for blocking out undercuts. You are in need only for lining the cavity for the aim of protecting the pulp tissues. Other cavities could be lined by resin-modified glass ionomer if it is discovered clinically and clear clinically. Resin-modified glass ionomer which bonds with the tooth structure and at the same time is compatible with the adhesive resin cement, or you may use the composite itself, okay, especially if you are using flowable composite. Then we could conclude that tooth preparation for indirect tooth colored restoration, you use cylindrical rounded-ended diamond burrs, okay, with decreasing grit starting from the coarse one up to finishing the preparation with the least aggressive one or with the least grit starting from 60 to 70 micron, then finishing it with 15 to 20 micron grit to provide smooth surface. Then the cavity should be slightly occlusal divergent walls, 6 to 8 degrees, and this is the action of or it is a responsibility of the selection of your cutting tools that should have this tapering, okay, rounded internal line angles, butt joint preparation margins, 90 degrees cavo surface angle, immediate dentine sealing using adhesive procedure and rubber dam to block out any defect-related undercuts with resin-modified GIC or with flowable composite, and then finishing the preparation with diamond burrs and rubber points. Those are the articles I used in preparing this presentation, about 16 articles, okay. If you are in need to read more about this topic, you could use these cited papers or articles. Also, I use these textbooks in preparing this presentation. Finally, please feel free to ask me, as your questions are always welcomed. You could ask me by commenting to this video and I will reply as soon as possible. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel and activate notification to get all the updates of my channel. Finally, I would like to thank you for assigning this time to listen to me. Until we meet again, Yasser Al-Wasifi. Thank you.